I'd like to start the talk today with a reading from Metaphysical Meditations, a 1952 edition, called Expanding Love. My kingdom of love must expand. I have loved my body more than anything else. That is why I am identified with and limited by it. With the love that I have for the body, I will love all those who love me. With the expanded love of those who love me, I will love those who are mine. With the love for myself and the love for my own, I will love those who are strangers. I will use all my love to love those who do not love me, as well as those who do love me. I will bathe all souls in my unselfish love. In the sea of my love, my family members, my countrymen, all nations, and all creatures will swim. All creation, all the myriads of tiny living things will dance on the waves of my love. To this week's topic, perfection is self-transcendence. I got a little weak-kneed when I contemplated the subject. It's not one that I'm really familiar with. However, on further reflection, perfection is self-transcendence means that every time we get a little bit beyond our little vortex of ego, that little swirling, down-pulling force that says, I'm separate from everything else, we make a step towards transcendence. There's a wonderful story that Swami Kriyananda tells. It was a vision that Paramahansa Yogananda had as a boy, where he was in a dusty market town in India, where the people haggling over prices and the monkeys running down and stealing things from the vendors and the dust and noise. And he would see people look up above, look beyond him, at this wistful expression in their faces, and then they'd drop their eyes and say, oh, but it's much too far for me. It's much too difficult for me. And he saw this several times, and he finally turned around and looked. And there atop this mountain was this verdant garden, just this picture of beauty, the absolute contrast to what he was experiencing there in the market. And he too looked and said, but it's much too far for me. And then he caught himself. And then he said, but I can take one step at a time in that direction. And that's really what we're talking about, is that with all of our little choices in life, we always have a choice where we can go towards expansion or towards contraction. So let me digress a little bit and I'm going to borrow a pattern from Padma's new book, which I highly recommend, where she has a little paragraph of describing an experience with Swami Kriyananda, or what she learned, and sort of the spiritual lesson from each one of those. It's a marvelous teaching technique, and I highly recommend her book, by the way. It's available downstairs. But I grew up in the housing tracts of the San Francisco Bay Area in the 50s and 60s, where there were just houses mile after mile after mile, and we saw the farmland and the orchards converted into yet more houses. Curiously, the movie theater where I saw Snow White and a lot of early Disney films now shows Bollywood films. It's the East Bay in Fremont. There is something at the center of the Indian community in the East Bay. But when we would go to the beach, we would go to Santa Cruz, which is like over the mountains and down to the ocean. And Santa Cruz is on Monterey Bay, which Rima knows very well, having grown up in that area. And Monterey Bay is just an enormous expanse of sand where there's basically dunes on the land side and this enormous flat beach, much like Cannon Beach, for those of you who know Oregon. that where the waves come in, big breakers come in off the Pacific, and then they hit this flat sand and they just slide up for hundreds of yards that come in, and they leave this sheen of water on the sand for quite a while before it all drains out. So we would go there as I'm camping with my family when I was younger, and later with my friends when we had driver's licenses and could go places. And we'd go skimboarding. And I don't know if many of you know this. This is California at its best. It's basically a plywood disc about that round. And you'd throw it onto this water, this sheen of water, and then you'd run and you'd jump on it. And the weight and the water would go shooting, you'd go shooting along on this thing until you started slowing down, and then you'd kick it out in front again and run and catch up with it and jump on it. So this was immensely fun, and you could go miles down the beach without even being aware of it. But once in a while, the beach wasn't entirely even. And you'd be humming along on your skimboard, and there'd be a little hummock of sand. And that little hummock of sand would stop that board in an instant. But you wouldn't stop. You'd go flying and sprawling on the sand. So this was the spiritual lesson of this was life can be subject to sudden changes. You could be cruising along and then everything changes drastically. Well, the other thing was when the water there was very cold and a little bit warmer than here. And it didn't stop us as teenagers, of course, from going swimming. And, the breakers, Pacific breakers, as you know, those of you who've been to the Pacific coast, are large. And we used to, we didn't have surfboards at the time, but we could body surf, which is where when the wave starts to come in, you're out a little bit beyond the breakers where they're breaking, and you start swimming. When you see a good wave coming, swim really fast. And if you catch the wave just right, you can ride a long, long ways in towards the beach until you basically bottom out on the sand. Again, this was a great thrill for teenage boys. This is where it was at. But there are some cautions to body surfing. One is if you don't time the wave right, the wave goes past you, and you're just left paddling water there, paddling in the water, which is not so bad. But the other thing, too, is if you catch the wave just at the wrong time or the wave catches you, you can be dumped inside the wave. And we learned quickly that if the wave caught you, if you resisted, you risked getting hurt. But if you just went with the wave, you might get bounced off the bottom, but you'd come out all right. So this was another lesson in when life's experiences are overpowering. Don't resist, go with them as best you can and come up for air when you can. So also more to the topic of today's reading, as I said, these long beaches had dunes behind them with the wave the wind, the breeze always comes in off the water. Most of the time, so it's piled up over millennia, these immense sand dunes. And, how tall is immense? I don't know, but they took a long time to climb up. And I don't know if any of you have experience with climbing in sand or sand dunes or cinder cones. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And sand is heavy. It's hard to move through. Plus, California sun, being what it is, a sunshine state, the sun is direct. And the breeze is coming over the top of the sand dune, and you're coming up the back, so you're just basically baking as you're walking up to the top of the sand dune. And it's, it's like you feel like you're in the French Foreign Legion or something in the Sahara. So one day I was walking up the top of this dune and just very much just eyes on the sand, 1 step at a time, totally focused on just getting up this dune. And I noticed it starting to level out a little bit, And I looked up, and I saw before me just this limitless expanse of blue water and sky. It was just, it stopped me in my tracks. It took my mind just to a place where there was nothing else, just this immense expanse and expansion. And it, obviously the memory stays there today, and even at the time, it was a few minutes before I came back to being a teenage boy at the beach. But that was one of the experiences that when we're working towards a goal and we just put one foot in front of the other, persevering through these things, the results can be surprising. So those were some of the lessons from Sunset Beach, as the beach was there. So there's more to the topic of perfection and self-transcendence. Is, as I was saying, with Yogananda's vision there, it's putting one foot in front of the other towards a goal. But the other thing that helps us to transcend that little self and that limited self-identity is doing things with others and doing things for others. It's often that we hear that the three main important things in the spiritual life are sadhana, meaning to practice our spiritual practices, our satsang, which are the company of fellow truth seekers that support us in our path, and then of seva, of service. And ideally, this is service to God. It's serving God and those around us. But everything we do with the step in that direction takes us closer towards that. And we'll see, for example, that people instinctively almost gravitate towards a greater sense of expression, a greater expanded identity, whether it's on, I think of an example of sports teams, where the team has a goal, it has a greater identity than the individuals, and each one of the individuals is uplifted through that association and also through putting out energy towards that goal. That's a very important piece. So it's an expanded identity in its effort towards a goal. Digressing a little bit, as when I was going to school, I spent a couple summers working for the Forest Service, which I just loved. It was out in Nevada and Eastern California. The land is very much like out by Wenatchee, where you have trees in the mountains and sagebrush out in the valleys. And one summer I spent on a survey crew where we spent all summer surveying an expanse of sagebrush where the only inhabitants were rattlesnakes and jackrabbits. This was the government I was working for, so I don't know what the ultimate goal is. Another summer I was on a fire crew, which was pretty interesting. We spent a lot of time driving around the state of Nevada and some in California, driving on dusty roads, putting out burning sagebrush. Not the most interesting, but we had a helicopter attached to our group, and that was like way fun. The only thing was that when you got to have a helicopter ride, it meant that you were going to some place that was, one, very inaccessible, and two, you weren't going to have much company there. So the crew that I was on was a 12-man crew. We had a crew chief who was quite good and he understood people. And the crew got along pretty well, except for one guy who I'll call Dave and myself. And Dave and I just did not like each other. It was, we don't know why, we don't know when, we just didn't like each other from the first time we laid eyes on each other. Sounds like karma a bit. But anyway, Dave was this immensely strong guy, strong as an ox, And apparently before he became a Mormon, he had led quite a wild life. But he had calmed down, and he was just he was a gem of a person, but like I say, we just did not hit it off. So the crew chief, you know, one of these times that we had a lightning strike up on top of a mountain, lightning had hit a tree and, you know, ignited the thing, and we had to go put it out. So who do you guess got chosen to go on the helicopter ride to put this thing out? Dave and me. So it was plenty exciting. I mean, flying up over the mountains in a helicopter is lots of fun, but when we got to this place, the pilot was unbelievably skilled. He landed this thing, he could only, it was so steep, he could only touch down on one skid, and the rotor, you know, the thing that keeps the helicopter in the air, was just clearing the ground by about that much on the uphill side, and he held the thing just steady as a rock, while we threw all our gear and ourselves out the downhill side, and then boom, he was gone. So we were left there with this burning fir tree that was, I don't know, probably about that big across and 50 feet tall, 50, probably more. And lightning, when it hits a tree, it can often spiral around down to the base and then start the tree on fire, or it can go straight down the tree and start the tree on fire. And it just blows off the bark in a path that you can see. And if you've done much hiking, you've probably seen some of these yourselves. So anyway, there was this tree, and there was Dave and me. And our job was to put out this burning tree and to cut a fire line, as they called it, you know, a bare earth around it so that the fire couldn't spread if we missed some embers and they came back to life the next day. So Dave, as I say, was a strong guy, absolutely without fear. And he got out the chainsaw and he sawed down this burning tree. And this was no small task. I mean, this thing was like majorly on fire, and he just sawed the thing down. And then, you know, tree fell down. Fortunately, he dropped it so the flaming side was up, and we spent the rest of the night walking to a nearby creek with our knapsacks, filling them with water, and coming up and dousing this tree. So by the end of the night, the tree was out, we were exhausted. It didn't matter how cold it was. We got a couple hours of sleep. And then the next day we hiked out. Fortunately, they knew where to pick us up because we didn't have a clue where we were. But the really interesting thing about this was that after that shared experience of putting out a lot of energy, working towards a common goal, Dave and I were totally okay with each other. We had gotten through past that like and dislike by putting out a lot of energy in a common direction, and it had transformed something. We were free from that karma, whatever it was. So there's an element there of, you know, putting out the energy is really important, having a direction to take it in. Here at the Sangha, we have many events, you know, where we have the chance to work together towards a common goal. They're always really high energy. Afterwards, we were kind of like, oh my gosh, what was that? But the amount of joy and the upliftment that we experience together, it does transform us. And it transforms us from the inside. So there's a couple of affirmations in Swami's affirmations for self-healing, which I think for me and for my wife Christy, it's one of the most helpful books, just because they're so succinct. And this Swami writes in the affirmation for self-expansion, I feel myself in the flowing brooks, in the flight of birds, in the raging wind upon the mountains, in the gentle dance of flowers in a breeze. Renouncing my little egoic self, I expand with my great soul self everywhere. So we we have, a couple weeks, must have been several talks ago, Jamna mentioned Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Viennese psychologist who went through the war in the German concentration camps. And as Jamna mentioned, his experiences there helped him to come up with a whole new form of therapy, which he used to help many people after the war when he went back into practice. But one of the interesting things in that book was that as a prisoner in the concentration camp, which was designed, the whole process was designed to demean people, he found that everything had been taken from him except the choice of how to take things. In other words, like Yogananda said, conditions are neutral. It's how we take them that makes a difference. And he found that to be kind of the ultimate freedom was not what happens to us, but what we make of it. And I spent, 15 years or so in the corporate world before coming to Ananda. And as my time was drawing to a close there, it was, Divine Mother had kind of hinted that it was time for something new. And of course, events in the company transpired to bring about my departure from there. And this is the story is one I've never really thought about until I read the reading today, and I realized it's pretty relevant. So I'll share it. So bear with me because it's the first time I've ever spoken about this. So, human dynamics being what they are and karma being what it is, I was the focus of a lot of energy, and not all of it was positive. I'm sure some of it was deserved, and some of it, like I say, was just, comes from different things. But it was clear that I was on my way out there, and then 9/11 came and basically sealed the deal with the general business downturn that happened there. But what I experienced was an environment that was very challenging from the day to day. It was like walking into a stiff headwind. It was just a lot of work to keep going. And there was a grace, though, in it. And again, I think I attribute this to Divine Mother's, kind of moving me off here. There was a grace that allowed me to see it as an opportunity for service, and not to get too concerned about the individuals involved, or even me as an individual. It was more just like something that had to be dealt with, and as I say, it was this grace that kind of allowed me to see each challenging opportunity as an opportunity to serve. We might say it's serve God in every person. I don't know I could really claim that. But there was obviously there was a situation there that I could bring something to that came from beyond me, that came through me. And it was, eventually I finished up there and I was done. But the real blessing, as I realized later, was that I came out of that experience feeling free. And that's the transcendence that we aspire toward, is that limitless freedom. And I really, looking back on it, I'm very grateful for having had that opportunity to step up to the plate there, and for Divine Mother's both her grace and, as we said, the reading said today, and for the healing strokes of her love, because they really were. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning. it was the beginning of my greater involvement with Ananda, and many good things came from that. But as I say, at the moment, you know, it was more just like taking each step one by one and aspiring to the highest. And that was the grace that allowed me to do that instead of just getting all upset. But it was a wonderful experience, and one that I wouldn't care to redo it, but it was definitely something that was a valuable lesson for me, and I just wanted to share that as well. Another affirmation from self-healing is for service. And Swami writes, I will serve God through others, and by my service to Him, release the hold the ego has on me. I am free in God. In God, I am free. So I'd just like to conclude the talk today with some of the closing lines from Yogananda's poem, Samadhi. And these are just the last couple paragraphs. Om blows upon the vapors, opening wondrously their veils. Oceans stand revealed, shining electrons, till at last sounded the cosmic drum, vanish the grosser lights into eternal rays of all-pervading bliss. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt. Ocean of mind, I drink all creation's waves. Four veils of solid, liquid, vapor light lift aright. Myself in everything enters the great myself. Gone forever, fitful, flickering shadows of mortal memory. Spotless is my mental sky, below, ahead, and high above. Eternity and I, one united ray. A tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself.